Okay, welcome back. In this segment, we're going to take a deeper dive into some of the library implementations within this NX project, and we're just going to see what it actually looks like when you're inside of one. So, continuing on, the question was if we could take a look now and see what one of these libraries has inside of it. So if I go ahead and open up, let's open up the form engine. So this is the library code as opposed to the application code. And so inside you have your any specific testing files that are unique to that library. And again, this was originally built prior to Jest, has yet to be migrated to Jest. You end up with a TypeScript and TS-lint configuration because each library has the opportunity of being slightly different in some way, for better or for worse.
Do mostly are those do most of these just extend another TypeScript, or do you
Yeah,
actually
pretty
have a
much.
copy of?
Yep.
Okay.
Yep. Each one just extends a
Okay.
parent.
I'm a little
Um,
confused. Okay, so form engine is directly under libs and it itself is a library. I was expecting there to be like a scope, which is either like kind of your app name or shared, and then have things under that. Like, what kind of library is form engine?
so, what kind and what way?
Well, like, what's your scope and tag on form engine?
So form engine,
Or your scope and type.
the scope is form engine. Let me go ahead and open it up. So the form engine. So you may have not been here yet when I mentioned that when I first started, I made some mistakes just because this is like my first time trying to go down this route of deeply understanding the recommended patterns.
Yeah.
And this actually is one of those hairy parts where I have here a project called NX Forms that's even scoped to NGX Forms, but if you look through here, you don't actually see NGX Forms anywhere. And it's just an outlying thing that just never got reconciled. If I were to do it again, there would have been, let's see, we've got the form engine renderers, but that's actually under renderer. So yeah, like there's definitely a bit of a naming conflict in this project. But the basic idea though is that I've got the application, which is my form admin,
Yeah.
and then I've got my form engine, which is kind of the heart of that application. And then following the the guide, there's the notion of these are libraries that only make sense to be used within this application.
Right. Right.
This actually has a life beyond how it's used in that application. When it comes time to publish, this will actually get published as a standalone thing to be used in any application. So it didn't make sense to scope it into the form admin library, or sorry, the form admin scope.
Okay.
Like, yes, the form admin absolutely does use it,
Yeah.
but its actual purpose is to be used by many applications around the world.
Okay.
And so it has its own. In this case, there isn't a grouping folder for it with some of the others because like there's no other top level idea surrounding it. It is its own construct here.
So I see you have a top level folder called shared. So what do you put in there?
Yep. So shared would be code that gets used amongst multiple libraries and or
Whereas
apps.
Form Engine's more of a feature, but it's sort of a shared feature.
Well, let me show you what's in it. So this also answers John's question of like when we dig into here, what do we see? Well, you'll see your source directory, and inside you'll always see a lib directory. The index file is a barrel file that you can use to like that specifies what pieces of the implementation will end up getting exposed externally. Also dictates what gets created by your DTS that gets formed when you build.
Yeah, I was noticing there wasn't a public API, but I guess that's an ng packager thing, and does this use ng packager or?
I'm not sure. Do you know?
I don't remember if it's ng packager or if it's a different bundler, but by default, NX doesn't create them as independently buildable libraries.
Okay.
But there's a flag when you generate, and also if you go into aglo.json and change your schematic settings, you can put the flag in there, and basically, so when you generate the library, you can pass in a flag to say, yes, I want this to be buildable.
Okay.
In which case, it'll put all of the I think it is just NG Packager. It puts all the NG Packager stuff in there, but I think it's still just index.ts and not public API.ts.
Yeah.
Maybe I was looking at something old. Okay.
And so inside an actual library itself, I'm going to quickly put a caveat on here is that the libraries that we're looking at are specifically Angular libraries. I didn't lie, but I kind of intentionally scoped a previous statement that said like all libraries and all apps like are all the same to NX. They all go in these directories. That's really only true about like what top level directory you put it in. The actual implementation details of the libraries can differ depending upon what kind of library you're authoring. So if you're authoring a Nest library, that looks different than if you're authoring an Angular one. And when you run the command line to generate it, you actually have to specify I'm actually generating a Nest or an Angular or a React library. That way it gives you the correct boilerplate code to consume. And so in this case, my library, it actually has, and this one has many things in it, and you can kind of think of this as almost like the library shell. Like there's that idea of an app shell. This one, the form engine, is almost like my library shell. It's the thing that says, all right, yeah, this is going to be like the central point for the library that I'm going to build and publish, where it goes out and it pulls together all the functionality that it needs underneath it. And so overall, though, I have starts the whole thing off with a module given the same name as the library as reflected by the path to this module. And so in this case, I don't have a grouping folder above it with which to further scope the name of the thing, so it just gets its library name as the name of the module. And then in this case, I do all kinds of complicated things in order to get my components dynamically added. That way I can have my different rendering engines. All that stuff I was describing about, yeah, you can actually have a Angular Material one or a Clarity one or whatever, including in this case, you can even do a series of web components. Like that actually works today, and it's in here, so it's kind of a fun little bit. But yeah, at this point, we've got our module, and we have, in this case, very few references to other pieces. This one just has this dynamic HTML host thing as part of my implementation details. So I think that is what you'll find is kind of true of all of them. The only real difference is that most of them you'll find kind of multiple layers. Actually, that's not true. I would say most of them are actually fairly flat. It's whenever you get to where you're scoping things like features and functionality specific to an app that you've put into a library, that's when that gets kind of deep. And so they actually recommend like each route would be a different feature library of your application. And so here, this actually corresponds to, oh yeah, no, I have like a management app. I got my nav bar as a library. I've got this thing called hooks in here that has its own route, and that's its own feature library.
This is another thing that, again, maybe I just didn't dig deep enough in NG Packager with the CLI, but I couldn't find a way to just make a top level directory that housed other libraries without making it a library as well. Like, so where you have shared and then a bunch of stuff under shared, I had to make shared a top level library in order to have things in. I couldn't find at least the notion of just grouping libraries together without having each folder have its own library inside it. If that makes sense.
Yeah, I don't know.
Because you have to arrow everything upwards, right?
Yeah. Well, so you could still create a ngx form /shared /util, but you would also have to set up the infrastructure to have ngx form /shared be something on its own. You couldn't just make it a placeholder that was a grouping for others. So if anybody knows how to do that, I don't care what the answer is anymore. If I can do it within X, then I'll do it this way.
It's trivial within X.
Yeah.
Mine are deeply nested. So like, I mean, the NX thing says feature dash, and that was too unmanageable for me. So I had feature folder, and then under that, then my features started to get too big. So then I actually created a folder called routes under feature to differentiate between kind of routed features versus just other random app features.
Right.
It was just big.
Yeah, no, and I would say that is still within the spirit of, well, I don't know, that actually might be split around. Would it have been reasonable to flip that and created a grouping folder called routes, where each thing underneath that was a feature, a library name with the name feature in it?
I don't know. I mean, to me, a feature and routes aren't one to one. I mean, I have lots of features. Some of them happen to be routes. To me, a feature is some section of functionality. So a feature might be, a quarter of the page, or it might be a whole view, or and so I'm just trying to break stuff up. It's
Right.
so enormous. But I just wanted to differentiate between things that actually. To me, a feature is anything that's not a dumb UI widget that could be used on any app.
Sure.
So.
Like, would it be viable to, now that you have further organized, could you just delete the folder called feature? Or could you arrive at a state in which you've successfully deleted the folder called feature?
My feature folder has lots of stuff in it.
Right.
Some of which are relevant, some of which aren't.
Right, but like, could you imagine reaching a point to where all of the libraries inside were further grouped? The reason I'm asking is because I'm trying to figure out, I'm trying to tease out if there's something that is like at scale unique about yours, or if it could have, like, yeah, this could have been done differently, and it's okay.
One problem. I'm sorry, I'm derailing your conversation here.
That's right.
I think one problem with the app I'm trying to fix is that they also, in the first place, put too much logic into every single component. So everything's a feature because nothing's a dumb UI widget.
Yeah.
So I'm making these little feature libraries for things like, well, if you had written this differently, maybe it would have been a UI library and some logic and a feature. That might be why I have so many feature libraries, because I'm like, oh, it's got too much business logic and it has to be a feature and not a UI widget.
Now, I think that probably drives straight to the heart of why their guide suggests this.
Yeah.
Because if you start with this, you don't end up with what you are now forced to go back and reverse engineer.
And I'm trying to, where I can, I'm trying to go ahead and fix it as I'm dragging stuff around.
Yeah. But yeah, like that's
I don't have 2 years to do this.
Right. Yep.
So all your business logic would lie inside the apps, and the libs become your reusable template components, or do they have business logic in your template components too?
It entirely depends. Like your business logic.
Right. It depends what that means.
Yeah. Like, well, how do you want to define that?
Right.
No. Like, so if I go in and I look at, for example, let's just go take a look at what my app consists of now. So another aspect of their guide is they actually recommend further specifying like the kind of app it is to help you differentiate and keep separate the notion of like a the feature shell that represents the desktop app versus the feature shell that represents like a mobile app. That way, if you're doing something like Ionic,
Does Ionic work well within X?
I do not know. Actually, yeah. Oh, no, do not move my source directory. Whatever you do, don't do that. All right, so in here, like, it starts to look just like an Angular CLI app at this point, but underneath my app folder, I've got like nothing, right? My app is literally just the app stuff. In this case, I'm still trying to figure out a good way of marrying Actually, like one of our videos that we recorded early, we were talking a lot about trying to figure out how to like marry up the CSS resharing with NX, and how those two like they don't really conflict with one another. They just don't really seem to consider one another, and so
There's just also images, like in your assets,
assets.
images and stuff, and it's like trying to break everything up into these kind of encapsulated libraries, but 20 of them are using the up arrow icon, like
Right.
and it points. Where's the point?
Yeah. I don't know. I don't have a good answer for that yet either. And so for this one, this is this application's material bits and their particular overrides and etc. And in the app itself,
Just using.
I'm calling out to my navbar, which was a library I created, and then I have my router outlet. And if you go look at my routing table, like those are lazy loaded modules.
That's cool.
Cool.
Notice you didn't actually name a library shell. That's what I
Yeah,
saw in
and I think that was another one of those like
Okay.
early naming mismatches with getting my head around it all. Yeah, they typically recommend that you actually call your app itself shell to make this very clear. The point that this is getting at, it becomes very clear when the name is shell.
Well, like they have the app, and then in the library they have one called feature shell, feature dash shell, and then it's kind of weird. It's like you have like app module in here, which has nothing, and then you have I don't know. My feature shell one just has like a main component. It's mostly just has router outlet and it's multiple levels.
Yeah, and so this could possibly have even been broken down further in support of the multiple apps of the same name idea, because you could have your desktop routing be different from your mobile routing, for example. And so yeah, that is all that mine does. I have a user service that I pull in from a data access library. That way I can send the forms navbar component to the user. That way it can show it in the corner.
Mm-hmm.
But that way my navbar becomes truly generic. So I could now, if I had a completely different application that has a completely different login mechanism, I can still reuse my navbar because the information about like a user is outsourced to the application to provide.
Cool.
With the like grand theme being like I might accidentally like stumble my way towards a successful standalone like published library because I'm simply building them as if it were possible to begin with.
Right.
Or even like a standalone UI library within
Right.
a corporate company.
Right.
That's nice. Very nice.
Well, and yeah, and that's the target audience, right? Like if we now draw this back to majority of our client projects, like they're all trying to achieve this idea of whatever we do, we need it to be reusable. We can't keep rebuilding everything. Well, yeah, one, if you're all working in the same repo, like you're going to have a higher chance of that. And two, like if you're forced and have these guardrails in place, you're going to end up accidentally creating reusable things just by way of following those patterns. So.
As far as drivers, like for my project, I mean they want reusability too, but like their really big driver is they broke up into these discrete libraries so that they feel more comfortable having, 10 teams putting in different features at the same time, trying to have them trouncing each other less and doing less bad architecture.
It would all be on a mono repo.
Right. Other questions?
So have you made anything with like Angular and React libraries side by side in the same? I might have a use case for this where we have like some stuff written in Angular, some stuff written in React, wrapped in a web component and shared between projects.
Yeah, so on another project, I ended up with like a little bit of nearly everything.
Yeah.
I ended up with Express, Nest, React, and Angular all co-located for a time.
Huh.
And React was doing all of them. I would say, or NX was doing all of them.
Cool.
And that was actually really, really nice. I think Today, if I were to go back and make a React app, just a React app, I would probably still use NX to do it because they take on a lot of the responsibilities that you kind of inherit all of the responsibilities that the CLI was taking on for you in the building of your Angular app, and then you directly benefit from them in React. Whereas the alternative is you can go with Create React app, and that's a great starting point. It like gets you into a buildable application, but that's pretty much it. That's kind of like where the story ends when it comes to like all of your build and dev tooling around it. You can like use it to do some minor things after that, but then you usually end up going shopping for like the next tool in the chain all the way down.
What does your project structure look like in that case?
Exactly the same.
So it's in libraries, and you open one up, and you're like, oh, that's React code.
Yeah, you have to like you would open it up. Now, hopefully, if you're using the scoping and grouping folders mechanism properly, you would know prior to getting there that, oh, this is a whatever library I'm headed towards. It's been grouped under this folder, and this folder has a name reflecting my other app that I know that app is a React app. So you shouldn't have to get there to know if you're already even vaguely familiar with the project. But yeah, once you get down there, it becomes immediately obvious. Your icons suddenly turn into, React icons. And
I was hoping that was the answer. I didn't want to, open up something and have an Angular list and a React list.
Yeah, no, it's just interleaved there. I will say, like a lot of your development tool starts to get kind of a dual head about it, just because it's saying, hey, I see you have TSX files, so clearly this is a React project.
Yeah.
And vice versa. There are triggers that make it go the other way from time to time, and so the tooling definitely could do a better job. The editors could do a better job of understanding the monorepo world, but no, they're not there. Um, there are some oddities when you around this idea of like I'm actually using an angular.json file to define my React project and its build
weird.
behaviors.
Oh, so it's all still in
Yeah,
there?
yeah. And because again under the hood it's a CLI with a custom builder that the NX team has built to describe how to run a React app, but it's still built on top of the CLI, which means it actually needs an Angular JSON
We
entry.
just like Angular so much we use to build our other front-end frameworks.
Well, it's like
I'm joking, but yeah.
but it's the only thing that actually like has this like fully understood.
I want to see someone do this Vue too.
I was about to suggest that we
Vue and Svelte. Let's go.
I was about to suggest that we create a new React library and name it Vue.
Please.
So we make our Angular, build our React, build our Vue, build our Svelte.
There you go. Yeah, so that's living side by side. That hasn't seemed to be a problem. And then all the niceness around auto rebuilding, hot reload, all that's pretty well solved.
In terms of your scopes, would you go so far as to make like literally like an Angular scope or a React scope, or is it just some other naming nomenclature?
No, I think that would be very much against the spirit of.
Okay, so it's just purely based on functionality feature-wise.
Yes.
Okay. Could you add a new tag though? Like right now, you type in scope : scope name, comma type.
That's probably a good idea.
My only thing would be like, what if I have
impl,
right.
Like I can totally see again that like this is an arbitrary mechanism.
Right.
That's what I want.
So I don't see any problem with like if you wanted to coming in here, adding another one, calling it like framework.
Yeah.
And then having it. Matter of fact, like that might be a good idea. Like maybe it's worthwhile naming one of these as a framework. That way you can say, oh no, this thing can only import. Like it doesn't make sense for you to try and import a React thing into your Angular thing or vice versa.
So the tags dependencies are enforced by TS-lint. So
with rules written by the NX team.
Are we just we're talking about having projects written in different frameworks and things, but are we assuming that they're all TypeScript? That pretty much a fundamental
yeah. Like when you generate a library, when you say ngg at narwhal/react library, it will automatically make it TSX.
So we're framework agnostic, but we're not language agnostic.
Well, I mean, it's policing TypeScript dependencies. So
Yeah.
you can't police TypeScript dependencies in your Java code.
Sure. I'm just saying. I'm just coming back, stepping away from that. And just saying, just the idea of NX in general. It's multi-platform, multi-framework, but all TypeScript.
Yeah, as far as I'm aware.
As far as I know.
Yeah.
Well,
Which makes sense.
matter of fact,
I thought about
it goes so far down that route that like it's actually somewhat challenging to have a comfortable Cypress environment with TypeScript if you go about it on your own. There's no convenient way that I've found to go about saying, please let me write my Cypress tests in TypeScript and let me run them without my own compile step in the middle, while also getting full type support, in the box for it. You can kind of you can piece together several things and get most of the way there, but you basically at the end of the day still need a little bit of your own scripting to do the automatic watch, rebuild, auto rerun, and NX has built that in. And so they're so TypeScript that they've added a TypeScript story to Cypress that I've not found elsewhere.
That's super convenient to be able to sort of delegate that problem to someone else.
Cypress and Jest are kind of their defaults, aren't they?
Yeah.
So I had to go in and configure it back.
Yeah, no, they support the old one still, but
yeah, I had to go in there and manually change everything back.
Yeah, no, I think I've seen that even within the testing frameworks, that they're still planning, if they haven't already, being able to support the different assertion. You can swap out your assertion languages within the testing framework still as well. So, which is something that I don't want to say it's a criticism, but slight thing I'm worried about is that one of the things I love most about NX is that it does have these opinions that at the beginning they were actually enforcing, upon their users, and that's I want that. I want to be able to take this tool chain that obviously adds value and be able to put that in place. That way there is no bickering over things that are just arguably of no value to argue about. This just doesn't give you anything to be arguing over. Well, are we going to be using just Mocha, Chai, Karma? For the vast majority of those decisions, it'll either will or won't work, and it'll be fine regardless of your choice. Having something that comes in and says, this is what we're using, let's move on to the next conversation, is immensely valuable. And so I'm kind of worried that if we keep going down this path of making room for all of the things, that we basically end up with a giant glorified Webpack where we still have to make a bunch of decisions, and we still have to go grab ourselves all the right little bundles of pieces. I don't think they're headed down that route, but I definitely wouldn't want to see that accidentally happen by way of bringing in more of the fold of,
I mean, they have opinionated defaults. It was nice that I could then relatively easily change it to something else, so I could bring in an existing project without having to rewrite all the test rules.
But you're in a very unique situation in your project where, by the time the decision to start with NX was made, you were already the one who got to make decisions. Where oftentimes we're kind of coming into a spot where we've been expected to be the experts from our clients. They trust us to be the experts. They trust us to make decisions until you actually start making decisions. And so
that's always a challenge.
And so that's a challenge. But if you can just get the one decision of, look, NX, there's a lot of trust that you can place in NX. Here's your social proof. Here's the proof of reliability. Here's its lineage. Here's the decisions that they're making. If you can just get that one yes, you don't have to get buy-in on all the others.
That's true.
And so you can get that in and then not have to argue with their entire team about every decision point. So I really like that idea.
The NX folks, they have to have been walking into, you can almost see the path that they must be walking into in the changes in the tool. And we know this path because we have walked this path, right? That on projects where we're involved with starting a fresh new thing, we can come up with a bunch of opinionated things. But on big mature projects where we're coming in to help steer a giant ship, we have to bring both recommendations and guidelines and ways to do things, but also bring a way to accommodate the fact that you can't turn an aircraft carrier on a dime.
just recreate.
And
it.
so like I mean like the tool is showing the progression of the way the tool is used, a path we have walked
Right.
of when you go step into a giant thing, you have to accommodate what's there to some extent to be able to work. Like you can't like eat the whole thing at once, so to speak, right? You got to like start with little bits at a time.
Yeah.
So I would guess that actually that NX will have to continue to allow more choices to make it possible to use it on bigger and bigger things.
But I mean, while that's true, like I worry that this heads down the same path every other piece of tech does, which is like they become so big that something
Yeah.
more small and agile.
It's the
is
circle
totally
of life, Paul. It's the circle of life.
Yeah.
Once a tool becomes sufficiently configurable to handle the really big projects, then you get a bunch of people on Twitter complaining that it's too complicated and has too many knobs and too many switches and too many modes and too many plugins, all this stuff to understand. Let's start a brand new one from scratch that doesn't have all that stuff, and it's opinionated and it's minimal and
Yeah.
and it's like it's all happened before, it will all happen again.
It reminds me of the Medium article I read last night about the guy saying, we don't need frameworks, just mustache on the server side.
Just use JSP, it'll be fine.
Yeah. The funny thing was, this is a younger person who wasn't from those days, and he's
yes.
it's like a new thing, like, I don't need Angular, I can just render this template on the server.
Like, why do I need all that
That's where we
client
came
framework
from.
to do server-side rendering?
Yeah.
Well, we've been down this
It's
road.
pretty funny.
And
About
it-
every 5 or 6 years is when it happens.
Yep.
It has advantages. I mean, there are advantages, but there are disadvantages.
All right. 2025, the year of single-page apps.
And then 2027, the year we switch back to server-side rendering.
All right. So I think John must have got what he needed.
Yeah, he must have because he left.
Yeah.
So I wasn't here for most of this segment. Is there anything else we can wrap this segment and go on to whatever
No,
we're
I
going to
think
do
so.
next?
Chris, did you have any other questions on this?
Oh, no.
All right, great.
Okay, we're wrapping this segment.